greetings. We're at my family home. Yeah, for all of those that said, you live in mommy's basement. How wrong you are. Look at this environment. I don't live anywhere. Place this nice. Anyway, this is a patron. Somebody who is over on the Patreon page, the Cover Killer Nation Patreon page. There's a link in the description box for you to get in on the fun if you so desire. This is my dad. Amazing. The resemblance is uncanny, right? Look at that. Look. Come on now. And he wanted us to talk a little bit about oldies, principally from his generation. Now, you were a teenager during one of the most influential musical movements, perhaps of all time.
That's right.
You were 19 years old during the summer of '69, which of course was huge in places such as San Francisco.
You didn't have to say that.
I know I didn't. Don't do the math. Just don't do the math. But
let me just interject one thing.
Okay.
You can tell the difference in the oldies here. The black T-shirt with the name on the front, the white T-shirt.
Sponsored by Hanes, ladies and gentlemen. But it is...
No plugs.
Yeah, no plugs, that's right, unless they want to sponsor me. But you were more of an R&B and old school rock and roll guy during this time where music was going through this transformation. What were some of the groups that you were listening to whenever maybe others were getting into the earliest works of King Crimson or Pink Floyd?
Well, the difference between the music between now and then, though, in my time, you could understand the lyrics.
Oh boy, here we go. We're getting into some of those arguments that we sometimes pose, ladies and gentlemen.
In my time, you could understand the lyrics. Now you can't. But there were a bunch of groups at the time that I really liked. The Dell Vikings, the Beach Boys.
Oh, the Beach Boys, absolutely.
The Bachelors. You ready for this one?
Sure.
The Gollywogs.
The Gollywogs?
That's
What do they have?
Brown Eyed Girl.
Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
That is a pretty important piece of history. Now, you might wonder, he's kind of glancing down. And that's because this wonderful book that was just put out, The History of Rock 1966, really is a good way to not only kickstart the memory, because remember back then, there was a big-time format that we don't see as often today, or maybe actually might be coming back. That's kind of the weird thing. The singles culture. Back then, whenever you got a record, you had an A-side and a B-side, one song on each, and then there were traditional albums. So a lot of these singles, that was really the culture that they were thriving on.
That's right. They were little singles, one side A, but there were a lot of DJs that made a lot of groups big by playing the flip side.
And that's one thing that you don't see today, and it's an argument that's out there that in today's radio society and radio culture that there's not as much encouragement due to big money backing to not do that. Instead, it's very formulaic.
Yeah, but what happened in my time, there was a thing called payola.
What's that?
Payola was when they would pay the DJs to play their records. They would play side A, they would play side B to get the promotion going. Although illegal, it was done.
There is a great film that spotlights this in a way, but it's not 100% payola. It was based off of an illegal radio station that was in the ocean.
That's right.
Pirate Radio.
Yes.
Terrific film. Highly recommended for any of you guys that want to sort of get a little snapshot. It's a little dramatized, don't get me wrong, but it's a snapshot of what the time was like. So what was it like growing up with all of this music surrounding you? You know, you were starting to see how rock was branching out. R&B was getting a facelift. A lot of groups like the Temptations and the Four Seasons were starting to really get big.
It was kind of tough to see the groups like the Temptations get big. They had a rough time coming up, and I don't have to tell you why.
Well, that's unfortunately true.
Yes, it is. But that being said, once they hit the home run, it was just something that really come out for all of the groups. But I think Dick Clark.
Yeah, Dick Clark. Mm-hmm.
On American Bandstand was one of the biggest promoters of all of the groups. And he's the one that brought a lot of those groups along.
Yeah, because Clark isn't Clark also responsible for the Beatles' big break?
I think the Beatles' big break came with Ed Sullivan.
Okay, you're right. It was Ed Sullivan.
The Ed Sullivan Show was the Beatles' big break in the USA.
Okay. Now, groups such as the Temptations were not only facing some stereotyping, but also they had to compete in the market that was also, we just mentioned the Beatles, we're right now looking at the Hollies. These are groups that they have to directly now compete with. Groups that not only are established, but as the barrier suggested, there was that as well. What do you think led a lot of people to really enjoy this side of R&B, aside from radio play? Do you think that it was just how addicting the songs were, how well written they were relatable?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think it were songs that people could relate to. It was words that people could relate to and understand.
Now see, Gene Simmons of Kiss is making this point not so much about clarity, but about the writing style of music, where you write the lyrics, you play the instruments and everything like that, but in this time, and it's something I do have to bring up, there was a lot of ghost writing that happened. One of the people that is featured on the person featured on the cover of this magazine, Bob Dylan, did a lot of ghost writing as well. Back then, bands and groups were able to cover one another without any sort of problem. Why do you think that changed?
I think it all changed because of money. The bottom line, money.
So nowadays it's something where you have to go out and get the rights.
That's right, you have to get the rights. Every time a record's played, you get a little couple pennies here, a couple pennies there, and that's why they don't want them downloaded illegally, because they don't get their money.
And once again, this is something where if you see a cover version of a track that's done, we speak about them every so often. The big one right now, Simon and Garfunkel, the song The Sound of Silence,
yes,
currently is back on the charts, but not as Simon and Garfunkel. It's the band Disturbed that did that, and they did a very respectable version of it. A metal group did that, which is incredible. But once again, it's sort of the pennies on the dollar effect, where a band has to look and see if it's even financially feasible. And most bands, honestly, will look at this as they want to do it because of the influence. Now, here's something that many of you may not know, and that's the fact that whenever I was growing up, when I was a wee CKN, a tiny little CKN, I was raised on this very same music, on these oldies. They say that we're sometimes the byproduct of our parents, and 100% based off of the radio and based off of the different songs that I heard. This is all things that sort of spurned my love for music. Now, do you think that there is a link between music of this generation that seems to speak to everybody and becoming very musically well-rounded?
You mean the 60s?
The 60s, the 70s, the earliest stages of rock and roll, even going back to Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley, since it's so relatable.
Yeah, I do. I think it very definitely played a part in it.
For me, at least, I know that it did, because you clearly heard what these artists were kind of all about.
That's right.
You had your fair share of love songs, and there was a business behind it where you had to have something that was a bit relatable. But then you also have some strange songs out there, such as The Trashmen with, The Bird is the Word.
Right.
You have some strange...
The Yellow Submarine.
Yellow Submarine is another great example. And then there was a song that I think was a Chuck Berry track, if I'm remembering correctly, entitled My Ding-a-Ling.
That's right.
And believe me, the illusion that is now in so many people's minds of what he was speaking about, you're wrong. You have dirty minds. Go wash them. But I know that I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for the music that you exposed me to whenever I was a kid.
Yeah, it was different. The times are different. And I still listen to the oldies. I love the oldies. And there's a lot of people that listen to the oldies, my generation.
Mm-hmm.
You go to all the car hops and things, and what do you hear? You don't hear metal.
No, you don't.
you hear oldies.
You do hear oldies. Anytime you see an old classic car show, they're really reflecting that generation very, very well. But another thing that is also becoming a big boom, thanks to satellite radio, is that there are DJs that perhaps may not have had an opportunity before that are now being afforded the opportunity to play this music again, such as Cousin Brucey.
Oh, absolutely. But Cousin Brucey came up with the music.
Right.
There was a dear friend of mine who I worked with at a radio station, and I don't want to mention any stations, but a dear friend of mine, Dick Jessen, who did all of the sock hops on Saturday night. He was just a fabulous music guy. Could answer any question. And I really don't think those kind of DJs are around anymore. Porky Chedwick.
Uh-oh.
The daddy-o of the radio.
That's right.
From Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. Local boy.
Those guys, they're just not around anymore.
They're a dime a dozen these days, too.
They had their own following. Everybody followed them that enjoyed the music.
Now, these days, you'll see this kind of following more out of a sports commentator.
That's right.
So, for example, we have a local sports talk radio station that probably has a more active Twitter following than the local rock station, and that used to not be the case. 105.9 The X used to have a huge following based off of their electric panel of DJs in the late 90s and the first portion of the 2000s, but these days it doesn't seem like it's present. It's Clear Channel, it's a lot of that differentiation of trying to get the programming down to a preconceived notion. It's very much an idea of getting the songs out there that are being paid for, as opposed to really exploring. Well, I want to thank you very much for being a part of this.
My pleasure, and I really appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate you being a patron, which many of you out there might think to yourself, having your father as a patron is almost like having Donald Trump receive $1 million from his father to get a startup company. It feels like it's cheating. To be perfectly honest with each and every one of you out there, the relationship that this man and I have as father and son is something that I treasure more than anything. And it's something that I do because I have talked with so many of you, and I've talked with so many of my other friends that have not had this fortunates. And so it's something that I hold very dearly. Now, if you want to hear more from this man right here, if you want to hear more about the oldies, the generations that came before that sort of paved the way for everything that we talk about today, let me know in the comments below, because this was so much fun, we could do it again.
We could really go on. We could go on and on about this with the Sun Records and Detroit Records and Motown.
Mm-hmm.
We can go.
That's right. So, if you like what you saw, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, give us some good comments, some good feedback, your experiences with this, because I know my population of listeners isn't all within a certain youthful range. I may exude youthful exuberance, which is a bit redundant, but I know that some of you out there love this stuff. I'm Cover Killer Nation, and I'll talk to you guys later.